inquiry. Madam Sara. Everyone in trade, and a good many who are not, heard of Werner's agency, of Solvency Inquiry Agency of the British trade. Its business is to know the financial condition of the wholesale and retail firms, from Rothschild to the smallest sweetstuff shop in Whitens. I do not say that every firm figures on its books, but methods of secret inquiry, it can discover the status of any firm or individual. It is this great safeguard of British trade that prevents much fraudulent dealings. Of this agency, I, Dixon Dukes, was appointed the manager. Since then, I have met queer people and seen strange sights, for men do curious things for money in this world. Like betraying a wolf online. It so happened that in June of 1899, my business took me to Madeira on an inquiry of some importance. I left the island on the 14th of the month by the Norham Castle for Southampton. I got on board after dinner. It was a lovely night, and the strains of the band in the public garden of Fouchot came floating across the star-powdered bay through the warm, balmy air. Then the engine bells rang to full speed ahead, and flinging a farewell to the fairest island on earth, I turned to the smoking room in order to light my cheroot. "Do you have a match, sir?" The voice came from a slender, young-looking man who stood near the taffrail. Before I could reply, he had struck one and held it out to me. "Excuse me," he said, and he tossed it overboard. "But surely I am addressing Mr. Dixon Dukes." "You are, sir," I said, glancing keenly back at him. "But you have me at an advantage." "Don't you know me?" he responded. "Jack Selby, Hayward's House, Harrow, 1879. "By Jove, so it is!" I cried. Our hands met in the warm clasp, and a moment later I found myself sitting close to my old friend, who had fagged for me in the bygone days, but whom I had not seen from the moment when I said goodbye to the hill grey mist of a December morning 20 years ago. He was a boy of 14 then, but nevertheless I recognized him. His face had bronzed and good-looking, his features refined. As a boy, Selby had been noted for his grace, his well-shaped head, and his clean-cut features. These characteristics still were his, and although it was now slightly past his first youth, he was decidedly handsome. He gave me a quick sketch of his memory. "My father left me plenty of money," he said, "and the Meadows, our old family place, is now mine. I have a taste for natural history. That taste took me 2 years to South America, and I had a strange share of adventures, and have collected valuable specimens and trophies. I'm now on my way home to Para, through the Amazon, having come by a boat in Madeira and changed there to Castle Line. But why all this talk about myself?" He added, bringing his deck chair a little closer to mine. "What about your history, old chap? Are you settled down with a wife and kiddies of your own, or is that dream of your school days fulfilled? And are you the owner of the best private laboratory in London?" "As to the library," I said, with a smile, "you must come and see it. For the rest, I am unmarried. Are you?" "I was married the day before I left Para, and my wife is on board with me." "Capital," answered. "Let me hear all about it." "You shall. Her maiden name was Dallas, Beatrice Dallas. She is just 20 now. Her father is an Englishman and her mother a Spaniard. Neither parent is living. She has an elder sister, Edith, nearly 30 years of age, unmarried, who is also on board with us. There is also a stepbrother, considerably older than either Edith or Beatrice. I met my wife last year in Para, and fell in love at once. I'm the happiest man on earth. It goes without saying that I think her beautiful, but she is also very well off. The story of her wealth is a curious one. Her uncle on her mother's side was an extremely wealthy Spaniard who made an enormous fortune in Brazil out of the diamonds and minerals. He owned several mines. But it was supposed to be his wealth turned his brain. At any rate, it seems to have done as far as the disposal of his money went. He divided the yearly profits and interest between his nephew and his two nieces, but declared that the property itself should never be split up. He has left the whole of it to one of the three who should survive the others. Perfectly insane arrangement, but not, I believe, unprecedented in Brazil. Very insane, I echoed. What is he worth? Over 2 million sterling. By Jove, what a sum! But what about the half-brother? He must be over 40 years of age, and evidently a bad lot. I've never seen him. His sisters won't speak to him and have anything to do with him. I understand that he is a great gambler. I'm further told that he is at present in England, and there's a certain technicalities to be gone through before the girls can fully enjoy their incomes. One of the first things I must do when I get home is to find out him. He has to sign a few papers, for we shan't be able to put straight out until we get his whereabouts. Some time ago my wife and Edith heard that he was ill, but dead or alive we must know all about him as quickly as possible. I made no answer. She continued. I'll introduce you to my wife and sister-in-law tomorrow. Beatrice is quite a child compared to Edith, who acts towards her almost like a mother. He is a little beauty, so fresh, so round and young-looking. But Edith is handsome too, although I sometimes think she is as vain as a peacock. By the way, Druce, this brings me to another part of my story. The sisters have an acquaintance on board, one of the most remarkable women I have ever met. She goes by the name of Madame Sara, and knows London well. In fact, she confesses to having a shop in Strand. What she has been doing in Brazil I do not know, for she keeps all her affairs strictly private. But you will be amazed when I tell you what her calling is. What? I asked. A professional beautifier. She claims the privilege of restoring youth to those who consult her. She only declares that she can make some quite ugly people handsome. There's no doubt that she is very clever. She knows a little bit of everything and has wonderful recipes with regard to medicine, surgery, and dentistry. She's a most lovely woman herself, very fair with blue eyes, an innocent, childlike manner, and quantities of rippling gold hair. She openly confesses that she is very much older than she appears. She looks almost 55 and 20. She seems to have traveled all over the world and says that by birth she is a mixture of Indian and Italian, her father having been Italian and her mother an Indian. Accompanying her is an Arab, a handsome, picturesque sort of fellow, who gives her the most absolute devotion, and she is also bringing back to England 2 Brazilians from Para. This woman deals in all sorts of curious secrets, but principally in cosmetics. Her shop is in the Strand, could, I fancy, tell many a strange history. Her clients go there, and she does what is necessary for them. It is a fact that she occasionally performs small surgical operations, and there is not a dentist in London who can vie with her. She confesses quite naively that she holds some secrets for making false teeth cling to the palate so that no one knows of it. Edith Dallas is devoted to her. In fact, her adoration amounts to idolatry. You give a very brilliant account of this woman, I said. You must introduce me tomorrow. I will, answered Jack with a smile. I should like your opinion of her. I am right glad I have met you, Druce. It is old times. When we meet up in London, I mean to put up at my townhouse at Eaton Square for the remainder of the season. The meadow shall be refurnished, and B and I will take up our quarters sometime in August. Then you must come and see us. But I'm afraid before I give myself up to mere pleasure, I must find that precious brother-in-law, Henry Joachim Silva. If you have any difficulty, apply to me, he said. I can put at your disposal, in an official way, of course, agents who would almost find any man in England, dead or alive. Then I proceeded to give Shelby a sort account of my own business. "Thanks," he said presently. "That is capital. You are the very man we want." The next morning after breakfast, Jack introduced me to his wife and sister-in-law. They were both foreign-looking, but very handsome. The wife in particular had a graceful and uncommon appearance. We'd been chatting about 5 minutes when I saw coming down the deck a slight, rather small woman, wearing a big sun hat. "Ah, madam," cried Sylvie, "here you are. I had the luck to meet an old friend on board, Mr. Dixon Druce, and I've been telling him all about you. I should like you to know each other. Druce, this lady is Madame Sara, of whom I have spoken to you. Mr. Dixon Druce, Madame Sara." She bowed gracefully and then looked at me earnestly. I'd seldom seen a more lovely woman. By her side, both Mrs. Selby and her sister seemed to fade into insignificance. Her complexion was almost dazzlingly fair, her face refined in expression, her eyes penetrating, clever, and yet with the innocent, frank gaze of a child. Her dress was very simple. She looked altogether like a young, fresh, and natural girl. As we sat chatting lightly about the commonplace topics, I instinctively felt that she took an interest in me even greater than that might be evinced from the ordinary introduction. By slow degrees, she so turned the conversation as to leave Selby and his wife and sister out, and then they moved away as she came a little nearer, said in a low voice, "I'm very glad we have met, and yet how odd this meeting is. Was it really accidental?" "I cannot understand you," I answered. "I know who you are," she said lightly. "You're the manager of Werner's agency. His business is to know the private affairs of those people who rather keep their own secrets. Now, Mr. Druce, I'm going to be absolutely frank with you. I own a small shop in the Strand. It is a perfumery shop. Behind those innocent-looking doors, I conduct the business which brings me to the realm. Have you, Mr. Druce, any objection to my continuing to make a livelihood? Perfectly innocent ways." "None whatsoever," I answered. "You puzzle me by alluding to the subject." "I want you to pay my shop a visit when you come to London. I've been away for 3 or 4 months. I do wonders for my clients, and they pay me largely for my services. I hold some perfectly innocent secrets which I cannot confide in anybody. I've obtained them partly from the Indians and partly from the natives of Brazil. I have lately been to Para to inquire into certain methods by which my trade may be improved." "And your trade is?" I said, looking at her with amusement and some surprise. "I am a beautifier," she said lightly. She looked at me with a smile. "You don't want me yet, Mr. Druce, but the time may come when even you will wish to back my infirmities of years. In the meantime, can you guess my age?" "I will not hazard a guess," I answered. "And I will not tell you. Let it remain a secret. Meanwhile, understand that my calling is quite an open one, and I do hold secrets. I should advise you, Mr. Druce, even in a professional capacity, not to interfere with them." The childlike expression faded from her face as she uttered the last words. There seemed to ring a sort of challenge in her tone. She turned away after a few moments, and I rejoined my friends. "Have you been making acquaintance with Madame Sara, Mr. Druce?" said Mrs. Selby. "Don't you think she is lovely?" "She is one of the most beautiful women I have ever seen," "but there seems to be a mystery about it." "There is indeed," said Edith Dallas gravely. "She asked me if I could guess her age," I continued. "I did not try, but surely she cannot be more than 25. No one knows her age, said Miss Shelby, but I will tell you a curious fact which perhaps you will not believe. She was a bridesmaid at my mother's wedding 30 years ago. She declares that she never changes, and she has no fear of old age. You mean that seriously? I cried. Surely that is impossible. Her name is on the register, and my mother knew her well. She was mysterious then, and I think my mother got into her power. But of that I am not certain. Anyhow, Edith and I adore her. Don't we, Edie? She laid her hand affectionately on her sister's arm. Edith Dallas did not speak, but her face was careworn. After a time, she said slowly, Madame Sara is uncanny and terrible. There is, perhaps, no business imaginable, not even a lawyer's, that engenders suspicions more than mine. I hate all mysteries, both in person and in things. Mysteries are my natural enemies. I felt now that this woman was a distinct mystery. That she was interested in me, I did not doubt. Perhaps because she was afraid of me. The rest of our voyage passed pleasantly enough. The more I saw of Mrs. Selby and her sister, the more I liked them. They were quiet, simple, and straightforward. I felt sure that they were both as good as gold. We parted at Waterloo, Jack and his wife and sister going back to Jack's house in Eaton Square, and I returned to my quarters in St. John's Wood. I had a house there with a long garden, the bottom of which was my laboratory. The laboratory was the pride of my life, it being, I fondly considered, the best private laboratory in London. There I spent all my spare time making experiments and trying this chemical combination and the other, living in hopes of doing great things one day, for Werner's agency was not to be the end of my career. Nevertheless, it interested me thoroughly, and I was not sorry to get back to my commercial commitments. The next day, just before I started to go to my place of business, Jack Shelby was announced. I want you to help me, he said. I've been already trying in some sort of general way to get information on my brother-in-law, but all in vain. There are no such person in any of the directories. Can you put me on the road to discovery? I said I could, and would, if he would leave the matter in my hands. With pleasure, he replied. You see how we are all fixed up? Neither Edith nor Bee can get money with any regularity until this man is found. I cannot imagine why he hides himself. I will insert advertisements in the personal columns of the newspapers, I said, and request anyone who can give information to communicate me with in my office. I also give instructions to all the branches of my firm, as well as the head assistants in London, to keep their eyes open for any news. You may be quite certain that in a week or two we shall know all about it. Shelby appeared cheered at this proposal, and having begged for me to call upon his wife and sister as soon as possible, took his leave. That very day, advertisements were drawn up and sent to several newspapers and inquiry agents. But week after week passed without the slightest result. Selby had gotten very fidgety at the delay. He was never happy except in my presence, and insisted on my coming whenever I had time to his house. I was glad to do so, for I took both interest in him and his belongings, and as to Madame Sara, I could not get her out of my head. One day Mrs. Selby said to me, Have you ever been to see Madame? I know she would like to show you her shop and general surroundings. I did promise to call upon her, I answered, but have not had time to do so yet. Will you come with me tomorrow morning? She turned red as she spoke, and the worried, uneasy expression became more marked on her face. I'd noticed for some time that she had been looking both nervous and depressed. I'd first observed the peculiarity about her towards the castle, but as time went on, instead of lessening, it grew worse. Her face was so far a young woman, was haggard. She started at each sound, and Madame Sara's name was never spoken in her presence without her evincing almost undue emotion. Will you come with me? She said with great eagerness. I immediately proposed The next day, about 11 o'clock, Edith Dallas and I found ourselves handsome driving to Madame Sara's shop. We reached it in a few minutes and found an unpretentious little place wedged between a hosier's on one side and a cheap print seller's on the other. In the windows of the shop were pyramids of perfume bottles, scintillating facet stoppers tied with colored ribbons. We stepped inside the shop. There were a couple of steps which led to a door of solid mahogany. "This is the entrance to a private house," said Edith. She pointed to a small brass plate on which was engraved the name, Madame Sara, Parfumeuse. Edith touched an electric bell at the door. It was immediately opened by a smartly dressed page boy. He looked at Miss Dallas as if he knew her very well, and said, "Madam is within and is expecting you." He ushered us both into a quiet-looking, soberly but handsomely furnished. He left us, closing the door. Edith turned to me. "Do you know where we are?" she asked. "We're standing at present in a small room just behind Madame Sara's shop." "Why are you so excited, Miss Dallas? What is the matter with you?" "We are on the threshold of a magician's cave," she replied. "We shall soon be face to face with the most marvelous woman in the whole of London. There's no one like her." "And fear her?" I said, dropping my voice to a whisper. She started, stepping back. With great difficulty recovered her composure. At that moment the page boy returned, conducted us through a series of small waiting rooms. We found ourselves in the presence of the madam herself. "Ah," she said with a smile, "this is delightful. You have kept your word, Edith, and I am greatly obliged to you. I will now show Mr. Drews some of the mysteries of my trade. But understand, sir," she added, "that I shall not tell you any of my real secrets, only that you should like to know something about me, you shall." "How can I tell who I should like to know about you?" She gave me an earnest glance which somewhat astonished me. Then she said, "Knowledge is power. Don't refuse what I am willing to give. Edith, will you not object to waiting here while I show Mr. Drews through my rooms? First observe this room, Mr. Drews. It is lighted only from the roof. When the door shuts, it automatically locks itself, so that any intrusion from without is impossible. This is my sanctum sanctorum." A faint odor of perfumes persuades the room. It's a hot day, but the room itself is cool. What do you think of it all? I made no answer. She walked to the other end and motioned me to accompany her. There stood a polished oak square table, on which lay an array of extraordinary-looking articles and implements. Stoppered bottles, full of strange medicaments, mirrors, plane and concave, brushes, sprays, sponges, delicate needle-pointed instruments of bright steel, tiny lancets, and forceps. Facing this table was a chair, like those used by dentists. Above the chair hung electric lights and powerful reflectors and lenses like bull-eye lanterns. Another chair, supported on a glass pedestal, was kept there. Madame Sara informed me for administering static electricity. There were dry cell batteries for the continuous currents and induction coils for the faradic currents. There were also platinum needles for burning out the roots of hairs. Madame took me from this room into another, where a still more formidable array of instruments were to be found. Here were a wooden operating table, and chloroform, and ether apparatus. When I looked at everything, she turned to me. "Now you know," she said, "I am a doctor, perhaps a quack. There are my secrets. By these means I live and flourish." He turned her back on me and walked into the other room with the lights, springy step of youth. Edith Dallas, white as a ghost, was waiting for us. "You have done your duty, my child," said Madame. "Mr. Drews has just seen what I want him to see. I am very much obliged to you both. We shall meet tonight at Lady Farrington's, at home. So then, farewell." When we got back into the street and were driving again to the square, I turned to Edith. Many things puzzle me about your friend, I said. Perhaps none more than this. By what possible means can a woman who brings the possessor of a shop obtain an entire to some of the best houses in London? Why does society open her doors to this woman, Mrs. House? I cannot tell you, was her reply. I only know the fact that wherever she goes, she is welcome and treated with consideration. Wherever she fails to appear, there is universally expressed feelings of regret. I had also been invited to Lady Farrington's reception that evening. In a state of great curiosity, there was no doubt that Madame was interested in me. I was not sure of her. Beyond doubt, there was a mystery attached to her, and also, for some unaccountable reason, she wished both to propitiate and defy me. Why was this? I arrived early and was standing in the crush near the head of the staircase when Madame was announced. She wore the richest white satin, quantities of diamonds. I saw her hostess bend towards her and talk eagerly. I noticed Madame reply, the pleased expression across Lady Farrington's face. A few minutes later, a man with a foreign-looking face and long beard sat down before the grand piano. He played a light prelude, and Madame Sara began to sing. Her voice was sweet and low, with an extraordinary pathos in it. It was the sort of voice that penetrates the heart. There was an instant pause in the gay chatter. She sang amongst the perfect silence, and when the song had come to an end, there followed a furor of applause. I was just turning to say something in earnest to my neighbor, Sir Edith Dallas, who was standing close by. Her eyes met mine, and she laid a hand on my sleeve. This room is hot, she said, half panting as she spoke. Take me out on the balcony. I did so. The atmosphere of the reception room was almost intolerable. It was comparatively cool in the open air. I must not lose sight of her, she said suddenly. Of whom? I asked, somewhat astonished with her words. Of Sara. She is there, I said. You can see her from where you stand. We happen to be alone. I came a little closer. Why are you afraid of her? I asked. Are you sure that we shall not be heard? Was her answer. Certain. She terrifies me, were her next words. I will not betray your confidence, Miss Alice. You do not trust me. You ought to give me a reason for your years. I cannot, dare not. I've said far too much already. Don't keep me, Mr. Dress. She must not find us together. As she spoke, she pushed her way through the crowd, and before I could stop her, was standing by Madame Sara's side. The reception in Portland Place was, I remember, on the 26th of July. 2 days later, the Selbys were to give their final at-home before leaving the country. I was, of course, invited to be present. I was also there. She never had been dressed more splendidly, nor had she ever before looked younger and more beautiful. Wherever she went, eyes followed her. As a rule, her dress was simple, almost like what a girl would wear, but tonight she chose rich oriental stuffs, made of many colors, and absolutely glittering with gems. Her golden hair was studded with diamonds. Round her neck she wore turquoise and diamonds mixed. There were many younger women in the room, but not the youngest nor the fairest had a chance beside her. It was not mere beauty of appearance, it was charm which carries all before it. I saw Miss Dallas, looking slim and tall, pale, standing at a little distance. I made my way to her side. Before I had time to speak, she bent towards me. Is she not divine? She answered. She bewilders and delights everyone. She is taking London by storm. Then you're not afraid of her tonight, is it? I fear her more than ever. She's cast a spell over me, but listen, she's going to sing it again. I had not forgotten the song that the madam had given us, the farmers. I stood still to listen. There was a complete hush in the room. A voice floated over the heads of their simple guests in dreamy Spanish song. Edith told me that it was a slumber song, that it boasted the power of putting almost anyone to sleep who listened to her rendering notes. She has passed many patients who suffer from insomnia, she answered. And she generally cures them with that song. You must not talk, she will hear us. Before I could reply, Selby came up. He had not noticed Edith and caught me by the arm. Come just for a minute, sit to this window, Dixon, he said. I must speak to you. I have no news with regard to the brother-in-law. Not a word, I answered. To tell you the truth, I'm getting terribly put over the matter. We cannot settle any of our business affairs because this man chooses to lose himself. My wife's lawyers wired the Brazil yesterday. Not even his bankers know anything about it. The whole thing is a question of time, was my answer. When are you off to Hampshire? Saturday. As Selby said the last words, he looked around him. Then he dropped his voice. I want to say something else. The more I see, he nodded towards Madame Sara, the less I like her. Edith is getting into a very strange state. Have you not noticed it? And the worst of it all is my wife is also infected. As a person is a dodge, the woman is practicing people up, making them beautiful. Doubtless the temptation is overpowering in the case of a plain woman. Beatrice, as beautiful as she is, young, what can she have to do with cosmetics and complexion pills? You don't mean to tell me that your wife has consulted Madame Sara as a doctor? Not exactly, but she has gone to her about her teeth. She complained of toothache, and Madame's dentistry is renowned. Edith is constantly going to her for one thing or another, but then Edith is infatuated. As Jack said the last words, he went over to speak to someone else. Before I could leave the seclusion of the window, I perceived Edith Alice and Madame Sara in earnest conversation with each other. I could not help overhearing the following words. Don't come to me tomorrow. Get into the country as soon as you can. If it's far and away, the best thing to do. As Madame spoke, she turned swiftly and caught my eye. She bowed, and the peculiar look, the sort of challenge she had before me, just flashed over her face. I made her uncomfortable, and during the nights, I followed if I could not get it out of my head. I remembered what Selby had said with regard to his wife and her money affairs. Beyond doubt, he had married into a mystery that Madame Sara knew all about. It's a very big money interest, and strange things happen when millions are concerned. The next morning I had just risen, was sitting at breakfast when a note was handed to me. It came by a special messenger and was marked urgent. I tore it open, and these were the contents. Dear Mr. A terrible blow is for us. My sister-in-law, Edith, was suddenly taken ill this morning at breakfast. The nearest doctor was sent for, but he could do nothing. She died half an hour ago. Do come and see me, and if you know any clever specialist, bring him with you. My wife is utterly stunned by the shock. Yours, Jack Selby. I read the note twice before I could realize what it meant. Then I rushed out and hailed the first hansom I met, and said to them, Drive to number 192 Victoria Street as quickly as you can. Here lived an old friend of mine, Mr. Eric Vandeleur, police surgeon from the Westminster district, which concluded Eden Square. No shrewder or sharper fellow existed in Vandeleur, and his presence case was essentially in his province, both legally and professionally. He was not at his flat when I arrived, passing down that street. Here I accordingly hurried, and was informed that he was just in the mortuary. For a man who, as it seemed to me, lived in a perpetual atmosphere of crime and violence, death and coroner's courts, his habitual cheerfulness and brightfulness was a matter of remarkable. Perhaps it was only the reaction from his work, for he had the reputation of being one of the most astute experts of the day in medical jurisprudence, and the most skilled analyst in toxicology cases in the Metropolitan Police staff. Before I could send him word that I wanted to see him, I heard a bang at the door. Vandeleur came hurrying down the passage, putting his coat on and runched along. "Hello," he cried. "I haven't seen you for ages. Do you want me?" "Yes, very urgently," I answered. "Are you very busy?" Head over ears, my dear chap. I cannot give you a moment now, but perhaps later on. What is it? You look excited. I have to go to Eaton Square like the wind, but come along if you like, and tell me on the way. Capital, I cried. The thing has been reported then. Are you going to Mr. Selby's at number 334A? Then I'm going with you. He looked at me in amazement. But the case has only just been reported. What can you possibly know about it? Everything. Let's take this hansom and I will tell you as we go along. As we drove to Eaton Square, I quickly explained the situation, glancing now and then at Vandelor's bright, clean-shaven face. He was no longer Eric Vandelor, the man with the latest club story, the merry twinkle in his blue eyes. He was Vandelor, the medical jurist, with a face like a mask, with lower jaw slightly protruding, features very fixed. This thing promises to be serious, he replied as I finished, but I can do nothing until after the autopsy. Here we are, and there is my man waiting for me. He has been very smart. On the steps stood an official-looking man in uniform, loose-sleeved. Coroner's officer, explained Vandelor. We entered the silent, darkened house. Selby was standing in the hall. He came to meet us. I introduced him to Vandelor, and he at once led us to the dining room, where we found Dr. Osborne, who Selby had called when the alarm of Edith's illness had been first given. Dr. Osborne was a pale, undersized young man, his face expressionless, with considerable alarm. Vandelor, however, managed to put him completely at his ease. I will go over and have a chat with you in a few minutes, Dr. Osborne, he said. But first I must get Mr. Selby's report. Will you please tell us, sir, exactly what occurred? Certainly, he answered. We had a reception here last night, and my sister-in-law did not go to bed until early morning. She was in bad spirits, but otherwise her usual health. My wife went into her room after she was in bed, and told me later on that she had found Edith in hysterics, and could not get her to explain anything. We both talked about her going to the country without delay. Indeed, our intention was to get off this very afternoon. Well, said Vandelor. We had breakfast about 9:30, and Miss Dowes came down, looking quite usual health and apparently good spirits. She ate with appetite, and, as it happened, she and my wife were both helped with the same dish. The meal had come to an end when she jumped from the table and uttered a sharp cry, turned very pale and pressed her hand to her side, and ran out of the room. My wife immediately followed her. She came back again in a minute or two, said that Edith was in violent pain, and begged me to send for a doctor. Dr. Osborne lives round the corner. He came at once, but she died almost immediately after his arrival. You were in the room? Vandelor turned to Osborne. Yes, he replied. She was conscious the last moment and died suddenly. Did she tell you anything? No, except to assure me that she did not eat any food that day, that she had come down to breakfast. After the death occurred, I sent immediately to report the case, locked the door to the room where the poor girl's body is, and saw also that nobody touched anything on the table. Vandelor rang the bell and the servant appeared. He gave quick orders. The entire remains of the meal were collected and taken charge of. Then he and the coroner's office went upstairs. We were almost alone. Selby sank into a chair. His face was quite drawn, haggard. The horrible suddenness of last thing is so appalling. As to Beatrice, I don't believe she will ever be able to see the same. She was deeply attached to Edith. Edith was nearly 10 years her senior, and always acted the part of a mother to her. It's a sad beginning to our lives. I can scarcely think collectedly. I remained with him a little longer, and then Vandelor returned. We went back to my own house. There I could settle nothing. There I could settle nothing. And then Vandelor rang me up at a telephone at about 6 o'clock. I hurried off to his rooms. As soon as I arrived, I saw that Selby was with him. The expression on both their faces told me the truth. This is bad business, said Vandelor. Mr. Dallas died from swallowing poison. Exhaustive analysis and examination have been made, and powerful poison, unknown to European toxicologists, was found. This is strange enough, but how it has been administered is a puzzle. I confess at the present moments all were not nonplussed. It certainly was not in the remains of the breakfast, and we have her dying evidence that she took nothing else. Now, a poison with such appalling potency will take effect immediately. It is evident that she was quite well when she came down to breakfast, and that the poison began to work towards the close of the meal. How did she get in it? This question, however, I shall deal with later on. The more immediate point of this, the situation is a serious one, in view of the momentary issues and the value of a lady's life. From the aspects of her case, her undoubted sanity and her affection with her sister, many exclude the idea of suicide. We must therefore call it murder. This harmless, innocent lady is struck down in the hand of an assassin with such devilish cunning that no trace or clue was left behind. For such an act there must have been some powerful motive. The person who designed and executed it must be a criminal of the highest order of scientific ability. Mr. Selby has been telling me of the exact financial position of the poor lady, and is also of his young wife. The absolute disappearance of the stepbrother, in view of his previous character, the highest degree strange. Knowing as we do that between him and 2,000,000 sterling there stood 2 lives, one has been taken. A deadly sensation of cold seized me as Vancouver uttered those last words. I glanced at Selby. His face was colorless, and the pupils of his eyes were contracted, as though he saw something which terrified him. What happened once may happen again, said I. We're in the presence of a great mystery, and I counsel you, Mr. Selby, to guard your wife with the utmost care. These words falling from a man of Edward's position and authority on such matters were sufficiently shocking for me to hear, but for Selby to be given such a solemn warning about his young and beautiful, newly married wife, who was all the world to him, was terrible indeed. He leant forward and hands. Mercy on us, he uttered. Is this a civilized country when death can be walk abroad like this, invisible, not to be avoided? Tell me, Miss Fenton, what can I do? It must be guarded by me. Believe me, there is no witchcraft in the world. I shall place a detective in your household immediately. Don't be alarmed. We will come to you in plain clothes and will simply... Nevertheless, nothing can be done to your wife without his knowledge. As you, Bruce, continued looking at me, the police are doing all they can to find this man, Sola, and I ask you to help them with your big agency and to begin at once. Leave your friend to me. Wire instantly if you hear any news. You rely on me, I said. A moment later, I left the scene. As I walked rapidly down the streets, thought of Madame Sara, her shop, and her mysterious background. Its surgical instruments, its operating table, its induction coils came back to me. And yet, what could Madame Sara have to do with the present strange, inexplicable mystery? The thought had scarcely crossed my mind before it had clattered along the curb. Turning around, I saw a smart, open carriage drawn by a pair of horses standing there. I also heard my own name. I turned. Bending out of the carriage was Madame Sara. I saw you going by, Mr. Druce. I've only just heard the poor news about poor Elizabeth. I'm terribly shocked and upset. I've been to the house, but they would not admit me. Have you heard what was the cause of her death? Madame's blue eyes filled with tears as she spoke. I am not at liberty to disclose what I have heard, since I am officially connected with the affair. Her eyes narrowed, the brimming tears dried as though by magic. Her glance became scornful. Thank you, she answered. Your reply tells me that she did not die naturally. How very appalling. But I must not keep you. Can I drive you anywhere? No, thank you. Goodbye, then. She made a sign to the coachman, and the carriage rolled away, turning to look back at me. Her face wore a defiant expression I had not seen. Could she have been connected with the affair? The thought came upon me with a violence that seemed almost conviction, but I had not reason for it. None. To find Henry Joachim Silva was now my principal thought. Advertisements were widely circulated. My staff had instructions to make every possible inquiry. Large money rewards, some incitements. The collateral branches of other agencies throughout Brazil were communicated with by cable, and all of Scotland Yard channels were used. Still, there was no result. Newspapers took up the case. There were paragraphs in most of them with regard to the missing stepbrother and to the mysterious death of Edith Dallas. Then someone got hold of the story of the will. This was retailed with many additions for the benefit of the public. At the inquest, the jury returned the following verdict. We find that Miss Edith Dallas died from taking poison of unknown name, but by whom or how administered, there is no evidence to say. This unsatisfactory state of things was destined to change quite suddenly. On the 6th of August, as I was seated at my office, a note was brought to me by a private messenger. It read as follows. Norfolk Hotel, Strand. Yes, sir. I have just arrived in London from Brazil, and have seen your advertisements. I was about to insert one myself in order to find the whereabouts of my sisters. I am a great invalid and unable to leave my room. Can you come to see me at the earliest possible moment? Yours, Henry Joachim Silva. An uncontrollable excitement, I hastily dispatched 2 telegrams, one to Selby and the other to Ben, begging them to come with me, without fail, as soon as possible. So the man had never been in England at all. The situation was more bewildering than ever. One thing, at least, was probable. Edith Dallas' death was not due to her stepbrother. Soon after 6:30, Selby arrived. Bendler walked in 10 minutes later. I told him that it had occurred and showed them a letter. In half an hour's time, we reached the hotel, and on stating who we were shown into a room on the first floor where Silva's private servant. Resting in an armchair as we sat a man. His face was terribly thin. His eyes and cheeks were so sunken that the face had almost appeared like a skull. He made no effort to rise when we entered, and glanced from us to the other in the utmost astonishment. I at once introduced myself and explained who we were. He waved his hand for his man to retire. You have heard the news, of course, Mr. Silva, I said. News? What? He glanced up at me and seemed to read something in my face. He started back in his shirt. Good heavens, he replied. It's my sisters. Tell me quickly, are they alive? Your elder sister died on the 29th of July. There is every reason to believe that her death was caused by foul play. I uttered these words. The charge passed over his face was fearful to witness. He did not speak, but remained motionless. His claw-like hands clutched the arms of the chair. His eyes were fixed and staring, as though they would start from their hollow sockets, and color of his skin like clay. I heard Selby breathe quickly behind me, and Vandeleur stepped towards the man and laid his hand on his shoulder. Tell us what you know in this matter, he said sharply. Recovering himself to the facts, the invalid began in a tremulous voice. Listen closely, for you must act quickly. I am indirectly responsible for my fearful thing. My life has been wild and wasteful, and now I am dying. Doctors tell me I cannot live a month, for I have a large aneurysm in my heart. 18 months ago, I was in Rio. I was living fast and gambling heavy. Among my fellow gamblers was a man much older than myself. His name was Jose Arano. He was, if anything, a greater gambler than I. One night we played alone. The stakes ran high until they reached a big figure. By daylight, I had lost to him nearly £200,000. Though I am a rich man, point to income under my uncle's will, I could not pay him a 20th part of that sum. This man knew my financial position, and in addition to the sum of £5,000 down, I gave him a document. I must have been mad to do so. The document was this. was duly witnessed and attested by a lawyer. That in the event of my surviving two sisters thus inheriting my whole of my uncle's vast wealth, $500,000 should go to Jose Arano. I felt I was breaking up at the time, and the chances of my inheriting the money were small. Immediately after the completion of the documents, this man left Rio, and then I heard a great deal about him I had not previously known. He was a man of queer antecedents, partly Indian, partly Italian. He had spent many years of life among the Indians. I heard also that he was a cruel and was clever, possessed some wondrous secrets of poisoning unknown to the West. I thought a great deal about this, for I knew that by signing this document, I was placed their lives, my two sisters, between him and a fortune. I came to Paris 6 weeks ago, only to learn that my sisters had married and had both gone to England. Ill as I was, I determined to follow them in order to warn them. I also wanted to arrange matters with you, Mr. Selby. One moment, sir, I broke in suddenly. Do you happen to be aware of this man, Jose Arano, a woman calling herself Madame Sara? You, cried Silver. Very well indeed, and so, for that matter, did I. Arano and Madame Sara were the best friends, almost met. She called herself a provincial beautification. She was very handsome and had secrets of the pursuing her trade unknown even to Arano. Good heavens, I cried. And the woman is now in London. She returned here with Mrs. Selby and Miss Dallas. Edith was very much influenced by her and was constantly with her. There's no doubt in my mind that she is guilty. I've suspected her for some time, but I could not find a motive. Now the motive appears. You surely can have her arrested. Vandeleur made no reply. He gave me a strange look, then he turned to Selby. Has your wife also consulted Madame Sara? He asked sharply. Yes, she went to her once about her teeth. She has not been to the shop since Edith's death. I begged her not to see her, but she promised me faithfully that she would not do so. Has she any medicines or lotions given to Madame Sara? Does she follow any line of treatment advised by her? No, I'm certain on that point. Very well, I will see your wife tonight in order to ask her some questions. You must both leave town at once. Go to your country home and settle there. I'm quite serious when I say that Mrs. Selby is in the most possible danger until the death of her brother. You must leave now, Mr. Selby. All business affairs must wait for the present. It's absolutely necessary that Mrs. Selby should leave London at once. Good night, sir. I shall give myself to the pleasure of calling on you tomorrow morning. We took leave of the second man. As soon as we got to the street, Vandeleur stopped. I must leave it here, Selby, to judge how much of this matter you will tell your wife. Were I you, I would explain everything. Time for immediate action has arrived. She is a brave, sensible woman. From this moment, you must watch all foods and liquids she takes. She must never be out of your sight or out of the sight of some other trustworthy companion. I shall, of course, watch my wife myself. But the thing is enough to drive one mad. I'll go to the country, Selby. Ah, that is the best thing possible. What I wanted to propose. Go, all of you, by the early train tomorrow. As I was turning away, Vandeleur caught my arm. I'm glad you were with me, he said. I shall write you tonight's instructions. Never be without a loaded revolver. Good night. By 6:15 the next morning, Selby, his wife, and I were in reserved, locked, first-class compartments, speeding rapidly west. The servants and Miss Selby's own special maid were in a separate carriage. Selby's face showed signs of a sleepless night, presenting a striking contrast to the fair, fresh face of the girl when the strange battle raged. Her husband had told her everything, though suffering terribly from the shock and grief of her sister's death. Her face was calm and full of repose. A carriage was waiting for us at Crossmoor. By half the time, past 9, we arrived at the old home of the Selbys, nice little nest of oaks and elms. Everything was done to make a homecoming of the bride, as cheerful as circumstances would permit, but gloom, impossible to lift overshadowed Selby himself. He could scarcely rouse himself to take the slightest interest in anything. The following morning I received a letter from Vanderbilt. It was very short, and once more impressed on me the necessity of caution. They said that 2 eminent physicians had examined Silva. The verdict was that he could not live for months, so his death precautions must be strictly observed. The day was cloudless. After breakfast, I was just starting out for a stroll when the butler brought me a telegram. I tore it open. It was from Vanderbilt. But old food until I arrived. Coming down. I hurried into the study and gave it to Selby. He read it and looked up at me. Find out the first train and go and meet them, old chap, he said. Let us hope that this means end to this hideous affair. I went into the hall and looked up to the trains. Next arrived at Crossmore at 10:45. I then strolled around the stables and ordered a carriage, after which I walked up and down on the drive. There was no doubt that something strange had happened. Vandeleur coming down so suddenly must mean a final clearing up the mystery. I just turned round when the village gates to open the carriage when the sound of wheels and horses galloping struck my ears. The gates were swung open, and Vandeleur, in open flight, dashed through them. Before I could recover from my surprise, he was out of the vehicle and by my side, carrying a small bag in his hand. I came down by special train, he said. There's not a moment to lose. Come at once. Is Miss Shelby all right? What do you mean? I replied. Of course she is. Do you suppose that she's in danger? Danger, was the answer. Come. We dashed up to the house together. Selby, who had heard the steps, came to meet us. Mr. Vandeleur, he cried. What is it? How did you come? A special train, Mr. Selby. I want to see your wife at once. It will be necessary to perform a very trifling operation. Operation? Yes, once. We made our way through the hall and into the morning, for Miss Selby was busily engaged in reading and answering letters. She started up when she saw Vandeleur and uttered an exclamation of surprise. What has happened? Vandeleur went up and took her by the hand. Alarm, he said, for I have come to put all your fears to rest. Now please listen to me. When you visited Madame Sara with your sister, did you go for medical advice? The color rushed into her face. One of my teeth aches. I went to her about that. She is, I suppose you know, the most wonderful dentist. She examined the tooth and found that it required stopping, and got an assistant, a Brazilian, I think, to do that. And your tooth has been comfortable ever since? Yes, quite. She had one of Edith's stopped at the same time. Will you kindly sit down and show me which was the tooth into which the stopping was put? So she did. This one wasn't, she said, pointing at me. What do you mean? Is anything wrong? Vandeleur examined the tooth long and carefully. There was a sudden rapid movement of his hand, a sharp cry from the Selby. With the deftness of long practice, a powerful twist, he had extracted the tooth with one wrench. The suddenness of the whole thing, startling as it was not so strange as his next move. Send Mrs. Selby's maid to her, he said, turning to the household. Then come, both of you, to the next room. The maid was summoned. Poor Mrs. Selby had sunk back into the chair, terrified and half fainting. A moment later, Selby joined us in the dining room. That's right, said Vandermeer. Close the door, will you? He opened his black bag and brought out several instruments. With one, he removed the stopping of the tooth. It was quite soft, came away easily. Then from the bag he produced a small guinea pig, which he requested me to hold. He pressed the sharp instrument into the tooth, and opening the mouth of the little end, placed the points on the top. The effect was instantaneous. The little head fell onto one of my hands. The guinea pig was dead. Vandeleur was white as a sheet. He hurried up to Selby on his hands. Thank heaven, he cried. I've been just in time, but only just. Your wife is safe. This stopping could have held another hour. I've been thinking all night over the mystery of your sister's last death, and over every minute detail of evidence as to how the poison could have come and administered. Suddenly, the coincidence of both sisters having had their teeth stopped struck me remarkably. Like a flash, the solution came to me. The more I considered, the more I felt that I was right. By what fiendish conniving such a scheme could have been conceived and executed is still beyond power to explain. Poison is very like hydrogen, one of the most toxic alkaloids known. So violent in its deadly proportions that the amounts that would go into a tooth would cause almost instant death. It's been kept in by the Göttergurti or something, certain to come within a month, possibly sooner. Most probably during the mastication of food. The person would die either immediately or after very few minutes, and no one would be connected to visit them. What followed can be told in a very few words. Madame Sara was arrested on suspicion. She appeared before the magistrate, looking innocent and beautiful, and managed during her evidence completely to baffle that accused individual. She denied nothing, but declared that the poison must have been put in the tooth by one of the two Brazilians, whom she had lately engaged to help her with her dentistry. She had her suspicions with regard to those two men soon after and dismissed them. She believed that they were in the pay of Jose Arano, but she could not tell anything for certain. Thus Madame escaped conviction. I was certain that she was guilty, but there was no shadow of real proof. A month later, Silva died. Selby is now